I am so thrilled to welcome onto the First Time Facilitator podcast, Andrew Hollo. Andrew, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Absolute pleasure, Leanne. And what shall we talk about?
Oh gosh, I mean, there's so much with you. I wonder what we can cover in this time that we have together. Andrew, I love your career progression and just seeing you now, what you're doing. It's like, I think a lot of us in Alan Weiss's community just hold you up as just who we want to be when we grow up. And I love that you've had a bit of a training background, but for those listeners that don't know a bit about you, like tell us how you found the work that you do today.
Look, this is I can give you the long story and the short story, so I might give you both bundled together really quickly. It's fair to say that I am actually what I wanted to be when I grew up. If someone pointed to the 15-year-old Andrew or the 25-year-old Andrew or the 35-year-old Andrew and said, look, there's the 50-something Andrew and look what he's doing, I would say, oh, that's pretty cool. I'll take that. That looks great. But if I think back to, watershed moments, these sorts of things in my life, I go all the way back to year 7. I'm 13 years old. I'm being asked to present to my class on a topic of my choice. And I've never done this before, and I'm terrified. I'm losing sleep. I'm going to the bathroom repeatedly. And I had 5 minutes, and I chose the subject of, wait for it, drum roll, Queen Victoria. Now, why a 13-year-old boy is interested in Queen Victoria, I have no idea. I cannot remember. And I found the public speaking part utterly terrifying. But what I found absolutely liberating was this idea that I could sum up Queen Victoria's life on 8 index cards. I could hold them in my hand and I could tell a story. And it was for me this revelation that organisation of information was that simple and it could be conveyed. And so that for me was a big stepping off point. And nowadays what I do is I lead groups of people through complex discussions around strategy. And my clients are usually organisations that are running the systems that run society. So all the stuff that out there that you often take for granted, like city development and healthcare and aged care and taxation and financial systems and environmental protection and regulation. There are people sitting in rooms working out how to do that stuff, and I facilitate those meetings. That's my job, to help them do that. So I've run thousands and thousands of meetings since that day in year 7. And I must say, it's one of the greatest privileges there is to take smart, well-intentioned, productive people and get them to arrive at a destination that works for them.
I love that you talk about the people in your group as smart and well-intentioned. Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about that in a second. There's so much to play on. I mean, the fact that you have delivered, you just said thousands and thousands of workshops, yet 13-year-old Andrew was nervous, losing sleep over his first presentation. Yeah. What happened? How did you get your confidence and build your skill in getting in front of a group?
When I was, how old would I have been? Early 20s. I had a professional role in an organisation that found jobs for people with mental illness and disability. I was an employment consultant. So my boss said to me, she said, Andrew, for you to progress in your career, you will need to learn to do public speaking because we're going to need to do a lot of presentations to employers, to prospective clients, etc. I flatly said, no, I won't do this. She said, it is a condition of your employment. And I loved my job and I loved her. And I just thought, oh no, this is terrible. And she said, I am going to enroll you into a program which was run by a man whose name I still remember, Rick Doran. And Rick was the master of public presentation. And he taught people how to do this. And every Wednesday night for a year, I turned up at Rick's offices with a group of people and we learned the art of presenting. And I went from absolutely hating the idea to, by the end of that year, feeling as though, oh my goodness, this is what I was put on earth to do. This is brilliant. So anyone watching this who thinks, I'm not sure, just throw yourself in and you might find that it's actually, life purpose.
I mean, it's wonderful to also hear that one of your bosses encouraged you. Like, that is a real watershed moment in your career. And another one, the fact that it was a condition of your employment. And I do wonder if maybe if people don't have that person in their lives that really like pushes them over to do things like that, loss of potential.
Look, I agree with you, because if I then think, well, what was it that got me doing what I am today? And, I went from being an employment consultant to being a trainer of employment consultants. That was what I did for years. Then I got into leadership training and then into the strategy work I do today. And the strategy work only occurred because a client said to me, we've got a strategy retreat coming up with our board. Do you know how to facilitate a strategy retreat? And what came out of my mouth was yes, of course. And what went on in my mind was, I have no idea what strategy is. So I had to reconcile those two. I had 2 weeks to do it. And I walked into that room, again, as nervous as I was, age 13, presenting with the flashcards and Queen Victoria. And at the end of that weekend retreat, they said, that was brilliant. That was incredible. And then I worked with them over the next 5 years on strategy. And they then recommended me to lots of other agencies. And that's really what got things going. So it's exactly as you say, Leanne, there are certain people who encouraged me, certainly, to take a leap well beyond where I was comfortable. And all that was needed for me was to say yes.
And the fact that you're sharing this today, I hope it has a ripple effect around the world with people that are listening and hesitating. It's like, if you've been asked, take the opportunity. Andrew, would you call yourself a facilitator now, or are you more of a strategy expert?
No, I'd say I'm an advisor on strategy. So what that includes, of course, is facilitation, because a large part of my work is to get people who come from dramatically different perspectives, world experiences, even disciplines, to land on a set of agreements. And so that requires facilitation. But I would say that facilitation is one of the tools that I use. So equally, yes, I'm a strategic advisor. I help synthesize complex concepts. And of course, I facilitate disparate groups of people.
Let's talk about the organisation of information. Going back to your 8 index cards, sounds quite intrinsic to you. Now, I want to share this. I don't know. Nicole told me a story once that she was in a workshop with you, and you were somehow you're running the workshop, you're gathering data and putting it together in Excel, and then you're presenting it back. And at the end of this event, you got a standing ovation from your group. I'm really curious around this whole synthesizing in the moment while you're doing everything else. Is it maybe intrinsic to you, or have you really built up that skill of being able to categorize, simplify on the go?
I'd go back to Queen Victoria Year 7, because it is about listening carefully or paying attention carefully. And some people call it joining the dots, but I say, but do you know what the dots look like? So you've got to do 2 things. You've got to know what the dots look like, then you've got to join them. And you're quite right. I think of this as it's match fitness. It's like an athlete being able to, run and dodge and weave and do that 50 times in an hour. And to someone like myself, who can barely run 100 yards, that seems an impossibility. But then what I do looks like an impossibility to other people. And I frequently say to people, these are learnable skills. Honestly, practice by listening to an interview like this one and switch it off and summarise it. Get it down to 4 sentences. And just get better and better at distilling the essence of information down to a series of dot points. But you're right, it is absolutely crucial to the work I do, where I'm working generally with people who are at the top of their game. They're senior people, they're time poor, they have high expectations. And therefore, if they're expressing some complex views, and I've got 10 people expressing complex views, I need the ability to say, okay, I am hearing these 3 things, and I'm hearing there's this issue that's unresolved as yet. And when I get that right, then sometimes you get, a round of applause, because no one's ever been able to capture it with that clarity. Other times it's simply, well, of course, that's what we came here for, is to get a roadmap, a direction, a set of agreements codified.
I never knew this. I love that you called it that skill of connecting the dots and gave everyone, actually, even myself, just a practical way that we can get better at it. So we don't have to be in a workshop to get match fit. We can just do it with, even watching an episode of Succession, we can summarize it.
Yeah, absolutely. The other skill I think that's really valuable here, and I play this game with my son, he's 14, it is relating unlike things. So how is succession like a pineapple? Those sorts of things. And we play this game. And what it does, it creates conceptual agility, and it helps enormously with being able to see like elements, which then help with the summarising. Because if you get too hooked into the literal content, you actually can't do it.
I actually, did you ever watch The Chasers? It's a show on the ABC when it was around about 10,
Once
15
or twice, yeah.
They did something where they got newsreaders and they actually showed their seamless segues between topics. So they were linking like drink driving to orange juice. I actually write about it in my book. I agree with you. And as you're saying that, I'm like, Succession is like a pineapple because it's kind of sour, like the pineapple I had in Thailand the other day, much like the characters within Succession. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm thinking prickly on the outside, soft on the inside, and goes rotten really quickly. And
you're the master. That's amazing.
Well, so it's funny, isn't it? You can have a lot of fun with this. Yeah.
It's a really great game. Forced connections. I think you've really underplayed who your clients are. In your bio, hopefully we can mention a few of them.
Sure.
So, these are as you said, there's actually a lot of stake in these workshops in terms of the people that you've got and what can happen as a result of what is actually explored in that. How do you set yourself up in terms of, what are you thinking? What's your state like? Even the night before, the day of, before, entering this workshop room, how do you get in the right state?
That's a great question. You talked about Alan being Alan Weiss a moment ago, and I've known Alan for some years now, and I found it a liberating moment when I was at one of Alan's events. I was staying in the hotel where the event was, and I'm in the elevator going down to the room, and Alan happens to be in the elevator. And I barely knew Alan at this point, and he had in his hand this yellow pad, and he was writing something on it. And I introduced myself and I said, I'm looking forward to the session. And he said, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude, I just want to get this idea down. And he wrote his thing down. And I said, may I ask what you're writing? And he said, this is my session for today. And I said to him, it starts in like 11 minutes. Are you just adjusting something? He said, no, I am working out what I'm going to say today while I'm in the elevator going down to the room. And I thought, oh my goodness, that was for me permission of the first order, because for years I'd been beating myself up for being underprepared. And in fact, what I'm now hearing is be underprepared. It is the way that I do my best work. So for me, I've learned this, that agonising over the choreography and the sequencing and the design and the this and the that is a path to nowhere, for me at least. What's better for me is to get into a productive state that says, I know what the intention is, I know the major lines of questioning, I also go in with a very strong belief that the people in the room already like and respect me. So I don't feel like I have to earn their respect, because as soon as I feel that way, it puts me behind the eight ball and automatically creates a power differential between me and my client. So we have to work as peers. There's no question that needs to happen. So they're just some of the things, and they're mostly mindset. It's very little of it is what I would consider to be the pragmatics of, getting your slides right and getting your index cards sorted. I'd say, they're almost by the by.
It's interesting. That is such a cool story that you shared, giving us all permission to be underprepared. At the same time, when I hear that, and I know your brand precedes you, I know I've met you a couple of times, I would say, but it's easy for Andrew to be underprepared because he's just that awesome and that much of an expert. What do you say to that?
I've always been underprepared. So I've never in my life felt fully prepared. And I've always seen it as a weakness until that moment in that elevator. Because for me, I always saw it as a character flaw. And now I actually see it as a strength, because what it creates is agility. So I would say I haven't changed, actually. I'd probably get away with it a little more than that. But then again, I'll wind that back. I will wind that back. Frequently, my clients say to me, oh, you've really done your homework. You really have taken time to understand the brief and to get to know us well. And I've got two ways of responding to that. One part of me thinks, well, not really, because yes, I've done preparation, but it's probably not what you think it is. I haven't gone through and read screeds of your annual report and memorised a bazillion facts about your business. What I have done, though, is become very, very clear on who you are, what you want, where we're going, and what our destination is, and got into the right emotional and intellectual state to lead the conversation. So, yeah, that doesn't take time. It takes, an emotional and intellectual state-setting exercise.
Yeah, wow. I mean, gosh, I could go on so many different threads here, but I do want to pull up the one you spoke about, knowing what the major line of questioning is.
Yeah.
Actually, what I love about your weekly newsletter, which we'll share in the show notes for this, is that you have a very provocative question in there that really makes me think every Friday, which is good, because Friday's not technically a real thinking day for me. I'm kind of spent by then. Do you have like your favorite questions, or is it more about, in this context with this group, here are some questions I think will really move us forward? Is it more that? Yeah,
it is. It is. And I think my equivalent nowadays of the index cards is going in with the 2 or 3 questions that I know I want answers to from the discussion today. Now, of course, that then also leads into things like, well, are there warm-up questions you can ask people? And I've just come from a strategy meeting with a client. It's a relatively small organisation, and what they want to do is have disproportionate impact. And so the question I asked them to consider right out of the gate this morning, I said, before we do anything else, I want you to turn to the person next to you and ask them this question. Name an organisation that punches above their weight and why you think that. And so that immediately got the noise level in the room up. It got the neurology engaged. It got them talking to each other. And it then led to a number of aha moments that even came out of the very brief debrief we did, all of 5 minutes, which then linked to what it was we were going to talk about for the next 3 hours. So when you say it's in the questioning, I could not agree more. I'd say just about everything I do is in the questions I ask. And then secondarily, it's in that ability to join dots, summarise, consolidate and synthesise really accurately.
You make it sound so simple.
I think it is. I think it is. I really do. I don't think it's complex. I mean, there are times when it can be. There are times when, honestly, I scratch my head and think, how am I going to make sense of this? I have tactics for dealing with that, but that does happen.
Yeah. I had that happen earlier this year, actually. It was a strategy session, and I was like, what are we going to do to move this forward? It just felt like for a while there, it was stalled pretty much. Yeah. And I think it's questions that really help you emerge from that.
Yes. Yeah. It's questions, or sometimes I find it's an insight by giving them some feedback or a summary of some sort. It's to say, I can see there's a relationship here between this and this, but to me, I can't quite get the link as clearly as I need. Can someone help? And usually someone will say, yeah, I think it's this. And then all of a sudden the group is doing the work, which is, of course, what my job is, what your job is. So I'm not shy about revealing to them that I'm struggling and I'm wanting them to help. Now, you have to play those cards pretty carefully, but that happens.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about that phrase you mentioned before, which was being match fit. And I know, you travel around the world, you run multiple sessions during a week. You ran, as I said, you were the client this morning. Now you're on a podcast. It's Friday afternoon. I'm sure you got calls after this.
Yeah.
How do you keep that up, that energy, your voice, especially when you said that in those moments, you're actually very deep and you're very present. That takes up energy.
Oh, yeah.
How do you deal with that?
I'm trying not to be cliched and say things like, get enough sleep and blah, 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 which is actually not true. I'm mostly underslept, I feel slightly. But my view is that energy is the currency of what we do.
I agree.
So what we are doing is moving and shifting energy in conversations. And if I want to get energy from people, I need to give energy to people to start with. I think that's important. And there's a fair bit in that around voice modulation and, movement and even proximity. But then I think for me, you asked a different question, which is, where do I get the energy from? I think I get the energy from downtime myself that I find nourishing. So now that's going to be different for different people. I've taken up tennis in the last year. And one of the reasons for this, to be perfectly honest, is that my head is so full of ideas, concepts from my clients, as well as talking with people all the time, that the idea of getting out there and hitting a small green ball around extremely hard for an hour is unbelievable, because you cannot think of anything else. You can't have a conversation while you're playing tennis, and nor can you think, I can't think of anything else. So it's those switching off things that seem to work best for me. But then when I'm with a client, and this was important, I think about 10 years ago, I found myself occasionally feeling depleted. And I thought, gosh, am I getting bored with my work? And that terrified me. I thought, gosh, I don't want to be bored with my work. And I didn't think I was, but I asked myself, what would make the biggest difference here? And I decided then I'll do an experiment. What if I went into every single conversation I was having and I set myself the intention of really having a good time? Myself, me, really loving it. And so I had about 20 meetings that week. And at the start of every meeting, I thought, what do I want to do to absolutely have a great time in this meeting with this person or these people? And that mindset shift, that it's in my power to set that intention, it's in my power to actually modify how we do things, so I get that made a huge difference, because the number of situations that I found energy suckers pretty much went to zero. And I thought, wow, that's good. So I haven't stopped doing that. I turn up to everything thinking, at a minimum, I am going to enjoy myself.
I just thought you were enjoying this conversation, but you do this all for every call. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And, but this is exactly right, Leanne, because, I'm in Melbourne, I'm catching the tram back from the city where my meeting was. And as I'm there, I'm thinking, okay, Leanne, she's great. We're going to do a podcast. How awesome. What are we going to talk about? And I kind of had a bit of a sense of some of the things you'd want to say. And I just started thinking about, well, what would I say on this podcast? What would I enjoy talking about? So, it's that only takes 5 minutes on a tram.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the perfect conversation. I was actually chatting to a friend a couple of days ago, and I was bringing up, I'm feeling a bit bored. Like, am I even doing the right thing? So basically, maybe you said 10 years ago, I'm about to hit 40 as well. Maybe and I was like, what is this? It's not midlife crisis yet, or is it? But now I have a strategy I can take away, which is amazing. I want to ask you about that. So conversations, you said in that week that you decided to shift your mindset and approach every conversation, basically like a party. You had 20 conversations in that week. And I remember something that we spoke about in Brisbane is that you said one of the single biggest things that moved your business was the frequency of conversations that you had, and actually exponentially increasing that. We've got a lot of listeners on the show that actually have their own consulting businesses and are curious around, getting work. So what is the value for you in terms of the number of conversations to have? I
define marketing for people like us as anything that creates a pretext for a conversation with someone. So it could be, I see something that I think, that could be of interest to these 4 people, and I'll just send it to them. And I'll say, thought of you, this is relevant to what we talked about a month ago, talk soon. Now, if I'm doing that sort of thing, and as you say, I've got a Friday newsletter that goes out to a few thousand people, that's another pretext for a conversation, because people get in touch with me and they say, oh, that was interesting what you wrote about X or Y or Z, or sometimes I'll be very proactive about it. I'll ring someone and I'll say, Leanne, can I have 10 minutes of your time? Because I've been thinking about something and I'd really welcome your views on this, and we'll have a chat. Other times I'm working on a project over here and I think, there's something in that sector that I don't really understand. So I'll phone someone or email someone and say, could you just give me some advice on how people in a sector like yours see the issue of whatever? And so I could go on and on and on, but it's a bit like the pineapple and succession exercise. It's just thinking, what possible excuse could there be for me to connect with someone? And bear in mind, none of this is selling.
No.
It's not selling. None of it is. It's simply a pretext to have conversations with people, because then how the selling works is people are off in their worlds. They're wanting to do whatever they're doing and they're saying, who could we get to help us? Oh, there's this guy, Andrew. There's this woman, Leanne. And that's why they think of us, because we've been on their radar sometime in the last 3 months.
Actually quite brilliant of you to bring in the forced connections example. The fact that you've connected that activity to this is like a meta, like gold star connection. Well done. And for someone like me, you've made it actually really accessible now in terms of how to do that. And it's a challenge. Like, how does this link together? And we've proved in the game, anything links together, right? It's just finding what that is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, really, if any of you watching or listening to this could do this, you can think of any topic and any person and generate a question that you can then ask that person about.
Amazing.
It's no more complex. So when you say it's complex, I don't actually think it's complex in the slightest. And again, match fitness is simply just doing that multiple times. Yeah. So if you did that 20 times in a week, and then you did that 80 times in a month and 1,000 times in a year, you'd be pretty good.
Yeah. I'm keen. I'm going to take on the Andrew Hollo challenge, 20 connections a week. I'm going to have a little KPI tick sheet over here.
Yeah. And again, if you then layer it in with this idea that at the very minimum, I'm going to enjoy myself, then at the absolute minimum, you've had 20 quite interesting conversations with people who you enjoy talking to. And that's brilliant.
I love it. It is brilliant. It's very, it's very pragmatic. And I love that you've linked in the fun part and making it enjoyable for yourself as well. That was one thing when Alan Weiss was in Las Vegas, he was talking about how much he writes. And when we were asking him questions around that, he goes, I write for myself. I don't write for anyone else. You got to enjoy that. And I see you, every Friday you deliver a kick-ass newsletter without fail. But I also read somewhere on the forums that you actually write these newsletters. It doesn't take you half a day to write a newsletter.
No, about 45 minutes.
How do you do that?
Unlike Alan, I don't write for myself. I'm actually, people say, you keep a journal and have a habit of writing. And do you know what? That's never worked for me. I'm an enormous reader. I love reading, and most of what I write, I want it to get out there. And so, my newsletter, it goes out Friday morning. I mostly write it late on Thursday night. Again, in the spirit of underpreparedness, it is simply a case of, sit down, have my 3 ideas, and get cracking and get it out there. So I give it a very light edit, and then off we go. So I certainly don't agonize over it, but I do in the week. I go about my time with my clients just out there in daily life, and I'm thinking, that was interesting. I put it into my phone into the notes app, and then I've got a bunch of things I can look at on Thursday night and think, oh yeah, that one, and that one. That's what I'm going to do. And I lead with the question.
Yes.
The question is the first thing I write. And then I write the piece that supports the question, which in many ways is also my facilitation strategy. Lead with the questions, know what I'm going to ask, because then everything else takes care of itself.
When you open up these questions, have you ever had situations and workshops where things really didn't go according to plan, or maybe there's been a bit of disruption, a bit of conflict in that? How have you, because I think that's the fear of every facilitator when they step into managing groups, is that.
Oh, yeah. Can I tell my story here of probably the worst ever situation where that happened to me? Was back in the days when I was doing leadership development work. So I had an assignment which was to work with 15 middle manager people in an organisation. I'd worked with this organisation numerous times, but I'd never met these particular people. The topic was something to do with assertive communications or something along those lines. And I walked in and I introduced myself. They were seated in a U shape in a sort of standard conference/training room. And as I started in, I was about 3 or 4 minutes in, and I noticed that everyone was sitting with arms folded, looking down, kind of making eyes across at each other. And I thought, oh, this is not going well. And may I use some mild bad language on this podcast so that I can paint the full picture? And anyway, so I stopped and paused, and I looked at everyone and I said, there is something going on here that I'm unclear about. Is someone willing to tell me what the reticence, the reluctance is about? Because that's what I'm sensing. And before I'd even finished that sentence, this very large man in the centre of the group slammed his fist down, or his palm down on the table, and he just yelled out really loudly, "This is bullshit." And that's the moment where I just thought, may the floor please open up and swallow me, because I thought, oh, and I said to him, tell me why. And he started this tirade of, these courses are just crap. They're always asking us to come to these things. They don't know how busy we are. We did this topic, similar topic 6 months ago. This is bullshit. And you're standing there telling us, and he just started this whole spray, basically. And when he'd stopped, I said, can I know your name? He said, Brendan. And I said, right, Brendan, I'm hearing the following. And I summarised his points. I said, have I got it? And he said, yes. I said, all right, I need to understand one thing from all of you, and that is, has Brendan just ridden his hobby horse into this room and has now got it off his chest? Or are there others in this room who partially or wholly agree with what he said? I said, can I just see a show of hands? And nearly everyone put their hands up. And so I took my notes and I tore them up in front of them and I dropped them in the waste paper basket. And I said, right, we're not doing that. I said, you are all leaders in this organisation. You need to talk about how you say no to HR and your bosses who are telling you to come to sessions like this that you think are bullshit. So let's spend a day talking about that. And they said, sure. And so we had a fantastic day. And my first step out of that room was to go to the HR director's office to say, you have some problems. And she said to me, oh, Brendan. And I said, yeah, and he has a valid point. Yeah. And his point is shared by a lot of other people. So we need to talk. So that for me was both utterly horrific and terrifying. But at the same time, again, it's that thing of think on your feet, be prepared to tear up the script, lead with that whole thing about what is it that the person in the room wants. Yeah. What do they need? Because it may not be what I'm briefed to do.
Amazing. When that happened, what was your mind doing? Like, were you slowing down, or were you like a duck on water? So you looked calm on the exterior, but your mind's going like crazy. Do you remember like how you were in that moment?
Yeah, I need time, not much, but I need time to organise myself. That's why I said, rather than react, I just took a deep breath and I said, Brendan, tell me what you mean. Tell me why you're saying that. And I thought, at the minimum, I'm going to get 3 minutes to just work out what on earth I'm going to do here. And so 3/4 of me is listening to him. 1/4 of me is thinking, how do I respond to this? And what are the various plan A, plan B, plan C, plan Ds that I can think of right now? Yeah.
Amazing. Now, you gave some advice before to facilitators thinking on your feet and giving the room what they want. Is there any other advice or tips that you'd share with someone, maybe a younger version of Andrew who is running these sessions?
I think there are probably a couple of things. So I think I already said, imagine everyone in the room already likes you. I think that is hugely important. I'd say give yourself breaks, meaning get people talking, because that also enables you to frequently take stock and be thinking, okay, what's working, what isn't? What am I going to ask next? Do I need to change my approach? Do I need to skip something, accelerate something, slow something down, insert something? So give yourself plenty of time for those things, and also check in with people constantly to say, okay, that last half hour, was that useful? Why was that useful? What haven't we covered yet that you think we need to before lunch? You know, it's those sorts of things that make it really evident that it does a couple of things. It makes it evident that you're there for them, which you are, but importantly, it gives me data on what I need to do to really get a great result, not just a good result. Because ultimately, and I think most people listening or watching are probably in this category, and I know you are, Leanne, is that referrals and recommendations are the, Alan calls it the currency of the realm, and it is. So being good is not good enough. We want to be really good. We want people to say, oh, that was a conversation unlike any we'd ever had as an organisation. So, yeah.
Amazing. I mean, I've got so many of these like sound bites from you. You talked about currency before in terms of referrals, but I love what you said about energy being the currency of what we do. Yeah, Andrew, look, I actually challenge any listener that is tuning in or watching this to send Andrew and I a 3-sentence summary of what we just discussed.
Yes.
I'm sure we can send a couple of books or something if you do that, maybe if it's to the first person that does that. Andrew, if our listeners would love to get in touch with you, where can we send them?
Go to my website. That's the easiest thing to do. Workwell is my business name, workwell.com.au. And there you'll be able to do a couple of things. You can subscribe to my newsletter. It comes out every Friday, as Leanne said, without fail. And it goes out with love. 3 interesting and provocative strategic questions. It's called the 5-minute strategic mindset. The other thing you can do there is download with my compliments a copy of my book, which is called From Impossible to Possible. And really, it's a strategist's guide to working with organisations that are delivering some form of public value or societal value. So if that's your thing, that's there as well. And of course, there's good old LinkedIn, where it is a fantastic place to hang out with people. So please hit me up on LinkedIn as well.
Amazing. I'll put a link to all of that in the show notes for this one. I love the title of your book. Andrew, every conversation, I mean, is just a joy. I learned so much from you. So thank you so much for being so open and generous with everything that you've learned.
It's fantastic. Great to talk, Leanne.
Thank you.
Thank you.